Here. You're just sitting way down, I guess. Uh-oh, our chat isn't up there. Tis.
Welcome to the live stream of the Post-Orthodoxy podcast radio show extravaganza. I'm going to share this to my page real quick.
Never mind that one.
Welcome to the live stream of the Post-Orthodoxy podcast radio show as I said, extravaganza. Okay, share. I'm going to share this to my page.
It's going to say it again here in a minute. It's going to get real meta.
It's going to get real recursive.
Real meta here.
All right.
Sean Yardy's in the house.
Hi, Sean Yardy.
Woo!
So then.
Today's going to be a lot of fun, guys, I think, because we oftentimes as a culture, I've realized since getting outside of the Christian bubble that I grew up in, I've realized that there are a lot of people who think we should be having very simple discussions with each other back and forth to figure out what the right thing to do is, without realizing that Christians and people who live within Christian bubbles without realizing it are adding extra rules to the game that nobody knows about, that aren't universal rules, and acting like they're universal rules. And so to dial it all back, welcome to Post-Orthodoxy.
I'm Dirk Sevier.
I'm Ainsley Sevier, and we're going to be reading a companion piece today. There were 2 questions asked on Quora, which is a crowdsourced question and answer website online. The first question last week was, I'm sad I didn't start the recording. The first question last week was, what don't most liberals realize? And the companion question is, what don't most conservatives realize? Which, if we're going to be fair, we should all of us be asking both questions and reading both answers. We need to get to know our neighbors. We need to achieve some balance. We need to figure out who the real bad guys are. And hint, it's not us. It's not you guys. It's not our neighbors. Our bad guys aren't lateral in this day and age. Our bad guys are above us. And so, for people that really need to know who the bad guys are, it's nice every once in a while to break down he said, she said, this side, that side, red versus blue, black versus white, etc., etc. What are the teams? Why do we have to be on a team at all? Where do the teams come from? What's the history of the team? Last week we read Peter Kruger's answer to Quora. He's an attorney who grew up in a very conservative part of the country and moved moderately liberal as he went to college until he realized that he was not at all liberal or progressive compared to the actual progressives he met at college. But he's not progressive enough to be beloved by the progressive group, nor is he conservative enough to be thought of as an ally by the people that he grew up with. So he's writing from the middle to both of these extremist camps of the blue no matter who and the red or die, etc. I don't know what their slogan is, but
right.
You know, I'm sure they have one.
Make America great again.
And I think it's really fitting this week, especially with all of the conservatively instigated protests coming out about being forced to stay home for your own good by the government, and how is that freedom, and that's going against the constitutional right of assembly. I think it's really fitting for us to digest this article about where did conservatism start and how did it go wrong, and what are some things that most conservatives don't realize. Because those are the people, for instance, just here in Montana today, there were protests in the state capital of Helena trying to protest the governor to give us our freedoms back so that we can all go out of the house and make our own choices.
Having some freedoms today.
Yeah, and so my tagline for the video is, freedom is universal or not at all.
No,
and
have you seen, I had some freedom. So have you, maybe...
A gay man probably took it from you.
So a friend went to go march for his freedom, to go exercise his freedom or find his freedom. I don't know. I think that's part of the thing that I've had to come to terms with people who tend to be fundamentalist, and I would say more so on the conservative side, but also very commonly on the progressive side. People, there's a lot of people out there who don't do metaphor or irony.
Right.
So freedom is, if somebody says, okay, you need to stay in the house so we don't all spread this virus, to that mindset, what they're hearing is, I don't have freedom anymore. Because freedom is very little thing. Freedom is freedom to move around.
Well, it's one of the amendments, right? The right of assembly.
So freedom to move around, and if it's suspended for a moment, then they're victims of having their freedom
of a
suppressed or
tyrannical
taken
government,
away.
which is something that conservatives have feared for a long time, is that the government. And I was honestly thinking, re-listening to our show that's airing on KBMF right now about Peter Kruger's article last week about how progressives have basically failed the heartland. And
Right.
one of my friend's Facebook posts that he commented on, he gave me a good response, and he was talking about how conservatives have really wanted, they're terrified of the government taking over their lives, of overbearing, bureaucratical, inefficient, tyrannical government. And I was like, I can see how you might be really, really worn out of having a bureaucratical, tyrannical, inefficient overlord telling you what to do all the time, being in a Christian group.
What?
Because that's what Christians do.
Right.
They follow rules that somebody else told them to all the time, whether or not it entirely makes sense to themselves as a human.
Yeah.
I can see how that would make you resist having anybody else telling you what to do.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, for some people, maybe there's a resistance. For other people, it's good training. Like, it's good training to treat the government in the same way. I don't think the government was necessarily intended to be like that.
No, I don't think the government's supposed to be Big Daddy either.
But
there's supposed to be checks and balances in small government. It's supposed to be working for us. It's supposed to be us organizing for each other.
I think in the zeitgeist of like the big G desert sky god thing, like in that world, if that's a reality that you subscribe to, that there's big G, there's God, and then there's the hierarchy, and there's
only
nothing
one
outside,
correct God,
and there's nothing outside of that, then how else would you view the government? But the same pyramid hierarchical structure. They can't see it as their representative body.
The government is supposed to be us.
It's supposed to be their representative body.
Taking care of us.
But instead it's seen as big G God, and they get to rebel against that because it does, it doesn't say in the Bible you can't flip off your government so much.
Right.
Or does it? I don't know.
I lost your point there a little bit along the way.
Me too.
Jesus did say, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's, because early Christians were trying to get Jesus to excuse them from their taxes since he was like, hey, I'm Lord. They were like, well, if you're Lord, then I don't have to pay my taxes anymore. And he's like, yo. I'm here to take care of a part of the thing.
No, my point is that if you're set up, if you're predisposed, if you subscribe to or are raised in a hierarchical structure such as Christianity, regular Judeo-Christianity hierarchy.
Well, I would think...
Right? If you're raised in that, then why would you not see the government the same way? I mean, you're already set up to
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. They do see the government the same way, and it is either idolatry and competition with the real God, or it's too much, I already have one of those, thank you very much.
I think a lot of them see it as...
That's my thought.
I think a lot of them see it as, like, as a hierarchy. They squeeze government into the hierarchy of the God hierarchy. So it's like... family, government, God, or
like
whatever.
Dad, pastor, president, Jesus.
So, like,
I know some people that do that.
There's your clan, and then
I don't know why we're fighting over this.
Are we?
I thought you would agree with me. You're the one that's always talking about Christians.
I don't think I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think it depends on what kind of experience you're having in that world.
In church or in politics?
In the Christian world. Like, if you're having a good time, like I wasn't having a good time, right? So I wasn't in there, so... I didn't have I did have like a strong imprint on government, which was more secular, which I had a larger group of people that sort of agreed, America, okay, around me. And I didn't feel oppressed by my government because I was so oppressed by the church. So I didn't have any sort of like anti-government stuff, even though my dad was kind of like
But you were
John
totally
Birch.
Oppressed by the church.
Oh, I know I was. I'm saying, but not by the government that I could tell. I mean, the church was so far worse. The government was easy.
Okay. The government wasn't really getting involved the same way the church was.
No, the church was all up to my business.
So to you, the government was like way less of a problem than the church was.
Plus, I was going to school, and it was all propaganda. So we're the greatest, and we saved the world, and blah blah blah.
The U.S. is the greatest, and they saved the world.
I didn't have a personal beef because I was sold that we were awesome. because of our country, and so also awesome because of our religion. But my experience with religion just wasn't as something I wanted to subscribe to.
Yeah.
All right. So last week was what don't liberals know?
What don't most liberals realize?
And this week we read the companion piece, what don't most conservatives realize?
So good.
I sort of took off last week with the whole thing, and I think you're more freshly sort of accessible to that mindset. Do you want to start off the story, open the story and your impressions of it, or read some
Sure.
quotes? What do you think?
There were so many good quotes. Part of me just wishes we could just work our way through the article and
Right.
talk about it. And I do. So I was beginning to wax eloquent before the show about something we're going to get into in this discussion. So the tagline for the show is "Freedom is universal, or it isn't freedom." You don't get to say some people get it and some people don't. Or it's not freedom. You're talking about privilege. If some people get it and some people don't, then it's privilege, not freedom. My personal morality bottom line, I guess, since moving beyond just letting the Bible tell me what to do all the time, has kind of been be who you were supposed to be, who you were born to be, which sounds kind of derpy, but like it's important. You were put here, or you arrived here to do something.
Okay.
So be who you arrived here to be.
Right.
And do no harm. And those two things theoretically check and balance each other just fine.
Theoretically.
And you can put together a similar manner of perhaps running the U.S. government. Freedom is universal, or it's not freedom. And your freedom to swing your fist ends at my nose.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the do no harm clause.
Right.
So theoretically, with that lovely little two-part Venn diagram, we ought to be able to figure out all the fairest laws. Except there's this extra ceiling or extra basement to excavate or extra outer bubble that people don't realize has been put around those two concepts. Freedom has to be universal, and your freedom to swing your fist ends before my face, which is the Christian concept where do no harm has very specific and extensive rules. Harm is gay marriage. Harm is an abortion. Harm is interracial marriage for some people. Harm is letting kids move out of the house before 18. Like Christians, sex before marriage. Christians and people who ascribe to Christian ideologies in the U.S. without realizing it have a much more specific and broad definition of harm than just don't infringe on someone else's rights. Because when I'm thinking do no harm, I'm thinking don't infringe on someone else's rights. If me expressing myself is infringing on your rights, then I think that's incorrect behavior. And I feel like that should be a really nice basic basis for human morality these days.
It gets complicated when you add things like personal property.
Well,
because like now you have property, right?
Yeah.
And so now somebody's freedom is restricted because they want to go from point A to point B and your property's in the way.
Well, I think a better example that Peter brought up in both of his responses, what don't most liberals realize and what don't most conservatives realize, he brought up the example of the farmer who wants to dredge the swamp on the back 40 so that he can get some extra acreage.
Right.
Why shouldn't he be able to do that on his property? And I feel like I would love to just sit down with some friends around the fireplace and explore this check and balance of universal freedom with do no harm. Because yes, I would love for the farmer to have universal freedom to do what he wants with his property, except that if he dredges that swamp, he's going to do irreparable harm to the local ecosystems far beyond his property and far beyond his lifespan.
Right.
So, whereas under the concept of universal freedom or it isn't freedom and do no harm,
well, that's the other...
anybody should be able to marry whoever they want.
That's the other...
Let me finish the sentence.
Sure.
We live in a Judeo-Christian, conservatively influenced society where gay marriage is considered harm. And so people think it's appropriate for the government to regulate who gets to marry. which is the ongoing battle. I see all of my progressive liberal friends on Instagram being like, why can't you just let us be? Why do you hate us so much? My gay friends, they're like, why do you hate, why do you care?
Why can't you just leave us alone?
Why do you care who I sleep with? You know, and the religious people are over there posting beautiful, prayerful, biblical memes about how they're trying to save the hearts of the gay kids.
Oh, because the gays
hurting themselves.
are hurting themselves by being gay because they're fighting nature. So that's the irony, because when you give the example of the marsh, draining the marsh and harming the environment. So that's not harm, because for some reason the environment is not sacred to that. Generally speaking, to the Judeo-Christian world, and especially speaking in the one that I was raised in, the environment has no rights. The environment has no life. The environment is just there, like Play-Doh, to be shaped into whatever we want to do with it. It doesn't have a life.
Yeah, people took that.
So there's no harming it.
They took the kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden for making a mistake and said, okay, now the earth is yours. I made it for you. It's too bad you messed up and you have to enjoy it while also sweating over your labor and getting thorns. But go take dominion of the earth. Because I made it for you anyway. So, and people have taken that take dominion over the earth thing to an extreme, an unsustainable, harmful extreme.
See the Berkeley pit.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, it's like they ignore that later on you're not supposed to muzzle the ox that's treading the grain. Like, work with the environment that you are using for your benefit, not just enslave it.
So that's where when you run into problems. Mm-hmm. So are you maybe asserting or saying that we can't have universal freedom with do no harm as long as we have this layer of the Judeo-Christian outlook in the culture?
Not even just Judeo-Christian. I think the way I visualized it when I began to realize that the God of the Bible isn't the only God on the whole planet.
Yeah, there's been some others.
Right. But when you're inside the Christian bubble, you think that the God of the Bible is the only God. And all the other gods are copies or fakes or rivals, impotent rivals. So when I got out and I realized that the God of the Bible is probably not like actually the universal one true God of all space-time, I realized that the Christians that I grew up with think of the whole of creation, the whole of existence. The whole of existence is God's. God made it. He existed beyond space-time, and then he invented space-time, stepped into it, and created the universe. And then he created humans.
And real estate agents. Eventually.
I can't say evolved, but we did that to ourselves.
Yeah.
So they think of if you want to conceptualize all of existence, it's all God's. He exists outside and beyond it and created all of it.
Right.
The God of the Bible, that is. And everything else is inside of it, and everything else inside of all of the God of the Bible's existence is either rolling with his story or rebelling against his story. And
the jealous God story.
And it's Christian gods.
Right.
It's Christians' jobs to help people who are either rebelling against God's story or don't know God's story to know God's story so that they can go to heaven when they die.
Vote God no matter what.
God no matter pod.
No matter what.
Wad.
Yeah.
So there's that visualization. In actuality, there are a whole bunch of different bubbles floating around of different religious beliefs, and they are all inside of the actual bubble of all of existence. So there's all of existence, and then there are religious bubbles floating around inside of all of existence. And instead of one religion being allowed to decide which morality is correct, there ought to be a universal morality that defines how far religions are allowed to go. And yet, most Christians will argue that you cannot have morality without God telling you what to do, what's right or wrong, because of the part in the Bible where Adam and Eve messed up, and so all of humans after that point are born broken. So because of original sin, because Adam and Eve messed up, all people are born broken. Therefore, we can't make right choices on our own. We need God to tell us what the right thing to do is. So we can't have any morality outside of God. Any morality that happens outside of believing in the God of the Bible is just a fluke. So it's not that we can't have universal freedom and do no harm, check and balancing each other, and with Christianity still in the picture. It's that do no harm and universal freedom have to check and balance each other and check and balance religions. All of them. Any religious belief that enables you to infringe on someone else's inalienable rights is incorrect.
Yeah.
That's my proposal.
Okay.
But I came from a Christian bubble where we were told which things were harmful and which things are okay, heavenly, godly. So I know that there are millions and millions of people on the planet who think of certain things as harm that are not actually harm. Because God says, if you do this, it will hurt your eternal soul, and I might have to send you to hell.
I keep getting this image while you're talking. I get this image of, you know that toy when you were a kid and it was like a little box and you had pieces that you put in the box. You take the lid off, you dump them out, and put it in. The lid had 4 shapes, maybe like a star, a square, a triangle, and a circle.
Yeah.
You had a matching piece, and to get them back in the box, you had to put them in the right hole.
Right.
Right? So I feel like that comes to mind when I think about this, that Isaac Asimov quote, which I'll read in a second.
Oh, yeah, say that one again.
I'll read it. I'll read it, and I'll tell you what this toy is all
And then I will get into some of my favorite openers from his article.
Okay. So there's this quote from Isaac Asimov.
Who wrote 1984?
No, he's more of a sci-fi guy.
Okay. That was Orwell.
Orwell. There's a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge.
All men are created equal.
So that premise that we're all equal, and you can only be equal up to your awareness of what is possible, right? Some people have different, some people are still trying to get the shapes in the things, and they feel pretty good when they do it, and they accomplish it. Other people have moved past trying to get the shapes in the things. So when you are using, this is the processing thing of somebody else is giving you the shapes, they've given you the pieces. Now your job is to make sure the shapes go in the pieces. That's what
of that game,
and also basic fundamentalist religion.
But the flaw is to think that game is
all
the
only
of reality.
Game. No, it's just a task, right?
That's the starting game.
So we've institutionalized this, which should, I feel like, be a process. Like maybe you teach God to people like the way you do Santa Claus. At some point, it's fun for a while, or it creates a sense of the magical and the mysterious. So you at least have that in your cognition. Is like Santa lives in this realm, and just because Santa's not real anymore doesn't mean that realm's not there for you anymore. Doesn't mean he's not
influential.
Right? So and God should sort of maybe Santa Claus and then maybe God. Don't even do God before Santa Claus. It would be ridiculous. Then you go to God, because that's got some production value that Santa Claus doesn't have.
Well, and God's, I guess Santa has that. He sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're naughty or nice thing.
It's a good intro.
Which I guess God does too, so.
Right, so it's a good, keep the kids in line.
I don't know, I just don't think you should start anybody's life with the thought that someone is always watching them to make sure they don't mess up, and they won't know if they've messed up or not.
Well, this is why I have
gives you lifelong anxiety.
This game of the shapes and the holes. That works up to a point, and then you have to get a little more nuanced. If you're gonna get a little more nuanced or you're not. The problem is with, I think, our current political crisis, our meaning crisis that we have, is that you have some people who are doing philosophy, some people who are doing trigonometry, and some people who are trying to get the square to go in the whole circle over and over and over and over, all at the same debate table. And it's making things frustrating for me in terms of like, how shouldn't we be doing something right now? Rather than just sitting around and bitching about how things are bad, shouldn't we actually, like, as humans on the planet, be doing things to correct the problem?
Right?
That seems like we should be doing that. But it seems to be difficult to get people to agree on what the problem is to do anything. Because we have various levels of folk all sitting at the same table, and you can only have a dialogue at the level of the lowest person at the table if we're all going to be involved and we're all going to be heard. So,
Right.
I don't know, I'm starting to feel more exclusive than I've ever felt in my life.
Well, you felt really exclusive when you were younger, from what you've told me. You felt pretty. I mean, not only was the religion you were born into excessively exclusive,
The family was exclusive.
the family was
The
exclusive,
country was exceptional.
the country was exceptional, super patriotic.
Republicans were winners.
White people were the best.
White people with all of the winning things.
Only 144,000 white men descended from British Jesus were going to heaven.
I was going to be one of them as long as I didn't cuss.
Or masturbate.
They didn't say so much about that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I couldn't quite say that one outright. Or
No, that was a
there
little
would
bit too much to talk
Wouldn't
about.
be very many people going to heaven. And then you left all that behind, and even though you moved outside of that realm, the mindset kind of wafted after you for a while.
Well, yeah, it's a way of processing the world. It's a,
Right.
there's a point, there's the hierarchy of the church, there's the hierarchy of the schools, there's the hierarchy of the family, the country. So that sort of imprint of the hierarchy was, I don't know, I sort of conquered it to a degree. It's still a structure, like it's still a shape that you use to organize things, but it's not the system, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of room to move around. You don't have to have a doctorate to have a valid opinion or maybe a solution to a problem. Like, I don't see in that hierarchy thing anymore.
Exclusivism.
But I think, we have a school that's set up to train people to go into factories. So first grade, second grade, third grade, everybody has to progress. All these varied minds from very genetic makeup have to all progress on math at the same time, at the same age, right?
Even though almost none of them will use math as an adult.
So then you have this sort of other school, like the Waldorfian Rudolf Steiner style of schooling, which is like, let's get a bunch of ages in the same room and figure out who can help who do what. And then you can progress. Some people are just going to shoot past third and fourth grade because they've got an affinity for that kind of thing, but then they're going to really suck at doing push-ups or whatever.
Right.
So you have that all working, and the problem is with our culture is I think our education system has really done a doozy on us in terms of being imprinted with bells, whistles, and paddles to respond in a hierarchical way, right? So there's people out there with really valid ideas and methods that we might have a better life, but they don't feel free of sharing them because, like, well, I didn't get a degree, or that guy's smarter than I am. So there's and that weird hierarchy thing that allows us to not really benefit from the various levels of education, because it's not like some people are smart and some people are dumb.
Right.
This guy may be like a super genius in science, but have an emotional IQ of a moron. Like, doesn't know how to do emotions, doesn't
Right.
know how to relate to people. Doesn't mean he's better than the person who doesn't know how to do math, but it has empathy and can heal animals that other people can't heal because he can actually tune in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one is better than the other, and we still set up that way. And I think it's time to maybe start looking at some non-linear ways of relating to each other in terms of, I like this Occupy movement thing.
Occupy Wall Street?
Occupy Wall Street, because it was supposed to be non-hierarchical, but it also didn't go very far because there was no head on the body. Everybody was supposed to be equal, but there was no brain. There was no head saying, hey, maybe we should go over there to get some money or get some water or get some... Nobody was doing that. So it was like a bunch of people resonated and responded, but the action was a protest and it was a demonstration, but it was not a change and it didn't have a plan. So that seems like some stab at the human organism to say, how do we get this cancer out? How do we? So like the body itself is trying to, like Bernie Sanders is like an extension of the Occupy movement, where they're like, this guy's actually talking about us for once instead of like blowing smoke up our
radio words.
Yeah. So I think we can. I don't know. That's why I'm going off on a rant and a tear.
Yeah.
But I think.
Well, Sheila Pataki Youngblood agrees with you. Doing things to try to solve the problem is the only way. Otherwise, nothing changes.
Right. So sitting around and complaining, I think it's not always sitting around complaining. I think we have to know where we are to figure out how to get where we want to go, and then we also have to know where we want to go. So how do you get a we out of all of this?
Right. Well,
how do you get a we out of the left and the right and the Republicans and the Democrats? I think we have to come up with some point of focus that is non-political.
And at the same time, trying to make a bridge of conversation to the people who are still swimming in the left versus right pool.
Right.
Like, hey guys, there's a bigger pool. We could be working on bigger strokes in the bigger pool if you feel like stepping out of the left-right pool.
Right.
Astrid Selling, our foreign correspondent from Sweden, says it's kind of strange to decide what to learn or what not to learn before you have learned it. How will you know? How will you know if you are going to use math as an adult if you don't get the opportunity? Apart from that, everyone actually does use math all the time. All right, well, we can fight over the educational system in another video, Astrid.
Well, math is just one example. It's not really about the subject. It's about everybody having to learn the same subject at the same time. When somebody's getting boobies before the other one does, somebody's shaving in 4th grade, some other guy's not shaving until he gets to college. Like, you can't regulate that stuff, but we're trying to regulate our emotional, intellectual, cognitive capacities all on the same level.
I don't know what primary schools are like. I don't know what primary schools are like in Sweden these days. I would love to get together with a couple of our different friends from different countries and have maybe a live stream interview and talk about the school systems in different countries. The U.S. school system was designed in the late 1800s. The one that we're using right now was designed in the late 1800s to create good factory workers. The industrial age was booming in Europe and heading over to America with steam, and we needed people to learn how to follow instructions.
Show up on time,
follow instructions, behave within the group, within your role, and do the same thing repeatedly with quality. That's the kind of school system that we have right now. Even though the world that we live in does not need those kinds of people anymore. We need a different kind of person. We are still making people show up on time, behave a certain way with the group, and learn how to perform repeated tasks with quality, even though humans are not doing factory jobs for Henry Ford anymore.
Well, aside from all that stuff, it also enforced team competitions. So not only in sports, but between classes. So you have 3 third-grade classes, right? So those classes will have competitions. Who's the better art, or who's the better spelling bee, or whatever. So you have these competitions, and then you have the sports between towns. So this town is a rival of this town, not a neighbor of this town. It's that way through the entire country. Each town, you're raised to think of the other town as your rival.
Right.
Football, wrestling, basketball,
that's probably more built
bees.
in than I know, since I was 24/7 homeschooled.
Right, so it's fractaled all the way up, which makes for good team players in factories, right? So like, let's get these guys. If you can produce more widgets this week than this team, then we'll give you a free lunch or something, right? So you've already gone through the school system and been trained to play nice with others.
Trained to live in competition.
Yeah.
Trained to live in competition.
Play nice with others against others.
Right.
Right. So that's what makes
work with your team to be better than the other team. You don't want to be causing problems within your team, because that might harm your chances against the other team. Game theory sucks.
Blue no matter who.
Gosh. Well, it's too bad that we've scared off all of our diehard liberal friends at this point in post-orthodoxy, because they've been after us for a long time to say mean things about the GOP, which is not what we're doing today. We're not saying mean things about the GOP, but we are going to be reading and evaluating some constructive criticism about conservatives in modern America, in the modern U.S. And our friends who get tired of us attempting to constructively criticize the democratic or progressive movement would probably love to be here for anything said about the other team. And we haven't really bothered much. Like, why would you say you haven't bothered much with talking about, I mean, it's because we don't have that mindset. We don't have the mindset that the red people are hurting the country. We don't have the mindset that we need to stop the red people to make America better. And our friends who are blue often do have that mindset. I'm blue and the other guys are red and they're the ones hurting the country and we need to either save them from themselves or save the country from them. Which is, we don't have that mindset, so we don't talk about them very much. You know, like we're like, let's talk about something we can actually fix.
I look at it like two cars in the junkyard. One of them is like kind of looks nice, but it's going to require a lot of internal work. The other one is got a big engine, but like the frame is bent.
Yeah.
And like, so it's like, what vehicle do you want to, like for me, I bitch about the DNC, the state of the Democratic Party, because that's the vehicle that I feel like I have a better chance of getting into than I do the GOP. I'm not four-wheeling. I'm not looking for an ATV. It's not in my wheelhouse. So I don't bag on that side because I'm not trying to reform it. I'm not trying to add a perspective of how it might be improved. There seems to be a resistance within party politics to critique your own party for its own improvement, even though we're raised in a country of excellence where sports is always about training, right? And refining and building. And in our politics, it's not. It's all about being flabby, don't critique anything, don't ever hold anybody accountable for anything, just don't criticize because we're fighting those guys right now.
We can do some constructive criticism later once we've beat the other team.
Which never happens.
Yeah.
It never happens.
Later, 40
after
years
the
later.
election. After the election. Everybody's so exhausted after the election, nobody wants to talk politics anymore.
Yeah, 40 years later.
Yeah.
Astrid says, that is a difference to our school system. It still has a Tayloristic history, but we don't have competition in the school agenda. Sports are after school. We don't have spelling competitions. We have very poor patriotism for our schools. That's great.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
That's wonderful. Less competition, the better. The less we can the more we can raise generations that aren't thinking they need to be in competition with each other to survive, the sooner our planet will evolve to like a happier, lovelier place for everybody.
Well, it's so extreme in our country. When I went to college at Oklahoma State in Stillwater, Oklahoma, the football rivalry between OU and OSU is so extreme. People get killed when those teams play each other because their alma mater becomes a part of their identity. They went to the better school. And it's a weird, like, primal battle. That's what happens in the sports between towns. It's like my gene pool against your gene pool, which you don't have in professional sports because it's just millionaires playing millionaires. But that thing is very real. People want to see the genetics kick the butt out of those other genetics. Makes them feel better about themselves. Or they want to kick the butt of the other genetics to prove that they're the superior genetics. It's really ridiculous. And yeah, OSU, OU, fights, drunkenness and fights, and people get killed.
Well, they said that was that's the same thing that usually happens after Butte High games. Like the last game, the final game in December or whatever, where Butte finally faced off against Bozeman, whoever the other big players in the state, the other huge high school team.
Okay.
So the Butte high school team was going to play a home game with the other mega high school team in the state.
Yeah.
And we lost.
Right.
And people were terrified that Buttians were going to beat them up before they could get to their cars.
Right.
Like, that's sad. It's high school.
Yeah. It's genetics. It's genetics showing off to the other genetics that even though you beat me in football, I can still kick your butt.
Yeah.
Don't think I can't.
Don't think I'm still not better than you.
Anyway,
Kira Ramsey says, like the Butte versus everybody slogan, can we make a counter slogan called Why versus? Why do we have to be
Right.
versus everybody?
Right. That's a part of. I think it's. I have to take care of the dogs.
Oh, yeah?
Dogs.
I guess so, yeah.
Right.
Good idea. Billie Jean, come here. Nice little bone you have there. Billie Jean, what's going on? Thanks for joining us today, guys. We left the dogs out on the porch because Billie Jean wants all of our love and attention. And when we're giving you our love and attention, she has to run around with squeaky toys to try and win it back. And so...
That was a totally appropriate barking.
Yeah, what was going on?
Man walking down the street in a dress with an umbrella upside down. Tulsa needed to let us know something was going on.
FYI, this is a higher level of weird than we usually get in our neighborhood.
Abnormal behavior must alert.
Alert the human.
Yes, so...
Yes, Kira is talking about the Believe in Butte signs. So the city council and some members of the Chamber of Commerce got together and crafted up the Believe in Butte signs as a like, everybody just keep your hopes up through the quarantine time thing. And they went out in the middle of the night and populated them around to a bunch of small businesses. And now I got one for us from Copper City.
Right. Sign and awning.
I was just waiting for the motorcycle to go by. Because it basically eradicates my voice on the recording.
Right.
Copper City Sign and Awning has the Butte versus Everybody signs for sale, so I went and got one for our front window too, because it's not Butte versus Everybody. Believe in Butte.
Yeah.
Believe in Butte, and I think that's a lovely shift away from we are awesome because we're not everybody else.
I don't like it.
I don't like that either.
No, I don't like the Believe in Butte sign either.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why not, you curmudgeon?
I don't like the word believe. It doesn't make any sense to me that you would believe in Butte. I don't understand what it means. Like, I live in Butte. I don't have to believe it. I know Butte, and
well,
I live
it's like
in
believe in
Butte.
Butte's potential, believe in Butte's ability to stay strong, believe in Butte's positivity, believe in Butte being able to make it through this thing.
I'm not
It's
saying
like have hope.
I'm not saying that I'm correct. I'm saying I just have a predisposed problem with the word believe, so I'm predisposed to not like it in any usage.
At least you're admitting that it's a predisposed problem.
Yeah, I don't even know if it makes sense. I'm just saying I don't like it because of that.
Right.
I have a prejudice against the word.
Etymologically, the word believe doesn't make a lot of sense.
Bad choice. I don't like the word.
But it does have a B, and Butte has a B.
I appreciate, yeah, that's true. Alliteration is nice. Alliteration
So,
is nice.
to get back to Peter Kruger's article,
Yes,
an
do it.
attorney from the Mitchell Hamlin School of Law, who responded to the Quora question, what don't most liberals realize, last week, which he responded to it a long time ago, but we went through it last week. This week, we've been reading and chewing on, and we're going to go through with you guys the what don't most conservatives realize article. This is so good. There are so many pieces. So he's in a bit of a interesting position to be writing about both of these. I think it's important that he opens the article by letting you know he's kind of in the middle, because I doubt most liberals or progressives or Democrats or whatever would take constructive criticism from somebody on the other side, and vice versa. And so he's basically saying, FYI, I'm in the middle.
I would almost say he's not in the middle. I would say he's somebody who actually can walk in both worlds. He doesn't have the best experience in either world, but he can walk in both worlds to versus being.
No, I know that. I know that, but
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just
you're right.
Perspective.
I know, and I think you know, and I think lots of people who would read this would know that he actually has the ability to consider different ideologies without being stressed out that he's not just sticking to his team.
Yes.
But for the sake of the ideologues and the identity politickers and the blue no matter whoers and the conservative ride or diers, he's letting everybody know, I don't pick one team or the other, so it's okay for you to listen to me.
Right.
That's all I was saying.
Okay, very good.
He says, I grew up a short distance away from the birthplace of the Republican Party. By the time I was old enough to be aware of politics, most people around me listened to WTMJ and Charlie Sykes. My great-grandmother would have voted for anyone that ran with an R behind her name, and she's not alone. I never agreed with the Tea Party, with their ideology or their tactics, and I'm a vehemently never-Trumper. The Republican Party left me behind a long time ago and has pointedly told me where the exits are in recent years for having the temerity to stand up and point out that they're not acting very conservatively. To be told that I'm really just a closet hippie libtard. I almost came to believe that label of liberal until I moved to the city for law school and met actual liberals, like die-hard progressive liberals whose email signature blocks contained their preferred pronouns. I came to realize I'm probably one of the last of what used to be called compassionate conservatives. I've actually read a lot of Buckley's works. I'm all for the idea of, hold on, let's really take our time with this and think through all the ways this progressive proposal could backfire. There was a time when conservatism was a strong brandy. Today it is a watered down jug of hobo wine. Whew, okay, so the important part of this for me was his conversation about freedom and prosperity.
Okay.
Conservatives love to wax poetic to me about the great halcyon days when America was the shining city on a hill, when markets and the men were free and liberty flowed in every stream, when the families were nuclear and divorce was rare and people had morals, by gum. There was freedom then, they tell me, freedom of speech and religion, and you didn't have this ridiculous nanny state ruining everything. We were prosperous. We were world leaders, the peak of civilization. Peter says, first and foremost, freedom and prosperity for whom? This always gets glossed over. You cannot separate these two issues. The reason that some people had a lot of prosperity and freedom was because it was built on the backs of others who absolutely did not. We still have a lot of the lingering effects of that today. In fact, conservatives have to stop seeing others getting freedom and prosperity as a sign that you are losing yours. You have just as much freedom and free speech as you have ever had. Hell, you are freer to speak than any time in history. When I see conservatives whining about the loss of freedom of speech, what they really mean is that they are no longer free to speak without consequence. Could you lose your job at a higher education institution for saying that conservative thing? Yes, you could. Guess what? For most of U.S. history, that's what it was like being a black man saying something about racial injustice. It's funny how conservatives didn't seem to have a problem back then and were enshrining the lack of freedom into a law. Anyway, he just goes on. I could just read the whole thing forever. But like,
did we put a link in the comments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll share it again for people who have just joined the video. So for me, he's just making such a great point over and over again. Like, we have friends rejoicing about how they're traveling around the capital of Helena for the sake of their freedoms.
No, they're getting some freedom.
They're acquiring
right
freedom
by
refusing to stay at home because the government is overstepping its bounds by trying to force people to stay at home.
Taking their freedom. Yeah.
And I think, like, when he talks about freedom and prosperity for who? For whom, technically, grammatically correct. Freedom and prosperity for whom? Conservatives want government regulation out of their lives. Get it out of my life, get it out of my life. And a lot of my friends said this on their responses to Peter Kruger's article, What Don't Most Liberals Realize, last week. They said they were admitting conservatives are in general really resistant to the idea of government being involved in my life more than necessary. It's supposed to be small. It's supposed to be there to serve me. It's not supposed to be there to tell me what to do all the time. And yet, conservatives are by far the most regulatory citizens in the country because of the religious influence in conservatism today. Conservatives are like, don't tell me what to do with my property. Don't tell me what to do with my guns. Don't tell me that I have to stay home. If I don't think my family needs to stay home, we should be able to go to church if we want to. And at the same time, they're saying, I will tell women what to do with their bodies, and I will tell gays whether they can get married or not, and I will
tell jazz musicians they can't smoke pot.
Yes. So it's like, what you do with your own body is nobody else's business. Are you infringing on someone else's rights? No? Then it's your business. Are you infringing on someone else's rights? No? Then it's your business. But conservatism, influenced heavily by Judeo-Christian principles, says that it is the government's job, both one, to stay out of my life, and two, to keep other people from doing things that God says are harmful.
So we have a problem because we don't have a shared definition of harm.
That's correct in this country.
crime. So the idea of a crime. A crime is where harm is caused to another. I think that's actually the definition. To commit a crime is to cause harm to another.
And harm is physical injury, especially that which is deliberately inflicted.
So when they made marijuana a crime, it's not
Actually a crime.
It's not actually. It's a law, and you can break the law, but you're not committing a crime.
And yet now people who smoke marijuana are criminals.
You're treated like a criminal and put through a criminal system, even though you committed no crime.
We can just leave the justice out of that.
And we allowed people to do that to other citizens. Like, I don't smoke pot, so I don't, even if you don't smoke pot, if you don't agree with it, if you don't like it, you should, especially if you're conservative, you should be fighting for a jazz musician's right to smoke a joint outside the club before he performs.
If you are a true,
doesn't make any sense.
Are a truly objective and logical conservative, you should be fighting for other people's freedoms.
Not just the ones that are familiar to you.
Not just the ones that are acceptable to you.
Or within your concept of the square that goes in the square. I have 4 freedoms. I can walk to the store and I can have freedom is a much more, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot to explore there that some people haven't.
Christians, that's where it comes down to this very intrinsic and essential difference to point out. It's like parallel universes. If you have ever seen any sci-fi show ever where there's ever any kind of parallel universe problem, it's like you have the man standing on the street with the umbrella, and then suddenly everything jigs a little bit, and then there's one man standing on the street with an umbrella, and then a man standing on the street with an umbrella that's slightly off kilter from him. Like this parallel universe problem. We are living neighborly on the same continent in the same time-space continuum with millions of people who have a tiny difference in their perception of reality that makes a huge difference in our ability to work with each other. Christians don't think someone should be free to do something that is harmful to them, and God of the Bible says what is harmful to you. Christians don't think someone should be free to do something to themselves that is harmful to them.
Astrid said, it is a very old and primitive view of culture/society that luck and prosperity is finite. The giving to some must be taken from others, and our modern societies are still built upon this.
That's freedom is not a pie.
Is that that's why I'm going back to these fundamental cognitive games of the square and the circle, and we need to be a zero-sum game. Is that a thing you were looking at today? Like this idea that because you have, somebody must have not.
Your having something is because somebody else doesn't have something. It all has to add up to 0. Freedom is not like that, and neither is love.
Yeah, we're still working from pretty primitive concepts. I mean, Audrey.
Very black and white.
Or Astrid. Why I keep calling her Audrey?
I have no idea. I don't think we even have an Audrey friend.
We don't. I do. Astrid says it's a very old and primitive view. So at what point do we get modern? What part do we get meta-modern?
By cycles of birth and death.
At some point,
painstakingly slowly.
I can recognize that there's some primitive things that are going on.
Right. When did the internet happen?
Not too long ago, 20 years ago.
Well, 20 years ago was 2000.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it was around before that, but it wasn't a part of everybody's life.
Most people in the West having internet.
Yeah.
Was like 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
Right? So I didn't have access to the internet for the first 10 years of my life.
Yeah, me neither.
I would email my dad on MS-DOS.
Right.
It was only in my teens that I began to have this awareness that I could connect with any part of the country and I could find out anything I wanted to know. I'm only 31. Thankfully, that awareness came to me in my teens when my mind was still developing my sense of reality for the rest of my life. There are people alive who spent the first 50 years of their life not being connected to the rest of the planet and not being able to just look up anything they wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of knew what you knew from high school, and if you were lucky enough to go to college, you knew what you knew from college. And if you happened to read a book in the evening, then you knew what you knew from that book, or maybe from your pastor, or maybe from the TV. But you didn't just get to go know anything you wanted to know by looking it up on the internet. And you didn't just get to be connected to anything happening all over the planet. You weren't just able to monitor how the cathedral at Notre Dame was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Or the ice caps.
No, the news came out, and then that was the news.
That was it.
Tomorrow.
If they didn't tell you how much the ice caps had diminished that week, you wouldn't know.
Right.
So, I think, sort of in answer to Astrid's question, or it is old and primitive to think of the world in black and white. And it's old and primitive that 70% of the U.S. still thinks of Christianity as the only actual real religion and God. It's primitive because there are thousands of other ones. And how do we know which one is real other than that your religion's book told you that one was the only one? And so I think people have to die and more people have to be born. I think that's how it has to happen. The people,
right. I started calling my parents neo-primitives.
Some people aren't ever going to...
Because it gave me compassion for them in the way that you don't just go to a quote-unquote primitive culture and give them all your new stuff, because their whole cognition, education, society, spirituality is built around a zeitgeist.
Right.
And you don't just come in and say, hey, it'd be easier if you do this, because you sort of shatter their reality bubble, and then there's chaos, because they don't just say, oh, I will now know all the things that you know. There's this chaos between unlearning stuff and moving forward.
You're so like, wait, I thought I knew what reality was, and you just said reality is something completely different, and that's terrifying.
So when you say a lot of the Judeo-Christian reality bubble is primitive, that doesn't allow, that's why neo-primitive still sounds insulting.
And nobody wants to be called a primitive?
No.
What are you talking about?
How do you make space for that level of cognitive facility? And say, this works for these folks, that's fine, but you cannot get involved in the legislature if you think the world is 6,000 years old. At what point do you draw the line?
Well, then we're getting into freedom of religion here.
Well, yes.
I don't think I'm not proposing the violent end of any religion.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think you were.
I should say, I'm not proposing the violent... Well, because I'm watching our Facebook feed.
Yeah.
And occasionally people pop into our Facebook feed who I know are Christians.
Right.
So, like, one of my friends just popped in right when I was saying, eventually all the people that think Christianity is the only religion will die.
Right.
You know? And so if you only hear that thing all day, you're going to have some ideas about me.
Well, that's why it's important when you say, I think that we have levels of cognition and that one is not better than the other, that there are steps to growing. I think we have done something in our culture where we've allowed a monotheistic reality to retard the growth of the larger culture.
It's not
because they have a different definition of reality and a different definition of harm. So other people who don't have that definition and are having maybe a different time are finding that time harmed by this larger societal bubble that doesn't allow for things outside of it.
There's conflict in the world that doesn't need to be there because of religious beliefs being imposed on people that don't have those beliefs.
It's pretty rough. And they feel persecuted. He talks about that in the article, the idea that the sort of fundamentalist conservative mindset feels beset upon, that it's being attacked.
Well, I can't bring up that analogy right now. We're already way down to the depths of saying negative things about Christians. I think
if I were say some positive things later to make.
If I were to project into the future, I can see how gradually totalitarian religious beliefs that claim to be the only one true way will slowly be held by smaller and smaller groups of people.
Yeah, that's a pre-Einsteinian, pre-quantum. It's from a different world. We've learned new stuff now.
Even if we just look at the internet,
Okay.
We have the internet now.
Right.
Like, God bless my Christian mommy friends. They can't keep themselves perfectly safe from what's going on in the world. And they have feelings.
Yeah.
And at some point, some Christian mommy friend is going to see a video about what's going on in the containment camps in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And she's going to look at her baby on the carpet and look at the picture of the Mexican baby on the cement with no diaper, and something is going to shift.
You would hope so.
And the internet does that.
Yeah.
It can't stay the way that it is forever. Unless somebody takes out the internet globally and we go back to being nuclear and tribal.
Mm-hmm.
It can't stay this way forever. Because humans will continue to, empathetic humans will continue to be beset with ideas outside of their totalitarian religion. And the non-empathetic humans will eventually move on to another plane of existence.
Evno Omni said they thought Christianity would be dead in Europe after the Enlightenment. Wait, he said something else too.
People have been saying Christianity is going to move on for hundreds of years.
Right. That's why I think maybe
our human lifespans.
It's not going away.
This is waves on the seashore, guys.
Right.
And I don't think we can judge progress by an 80-year span.
Well, I would say that perspective of like, oh, well, we've learned more than that, so that's going to die off, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's because it's this sort of Rudolf Steiner way of education. We have to start looking at each other. Like, I have wonderful Christian friends.
Yeah.
I don't want to annoy them or harm their sense of self by critiquing a broad stroke idea of Judeo-Christianity.
We have to say some broad things, and then we always have to take the time to try to dial it back. And,
it's hard.
And disclaimer, because my friend Alyssa probably only popped on for the part where I said eventually all the Christians will die.
Sure.
Which is not my intention or
There's
even
more to the
the
story.
point of what I was talking about.
There's more to the story. So that's the idea that I feel like there's some wonderful forms of religions. I've seen some Buddhism that's pretty ridiculous and fascist, and even Buddhism, like
what?
Yeah, there's some fascist Buddhism. So I think there's room for those things, and I just don't think they should be involved. I mean, that was the whole purpose of the separation of church and state, is you're not supposed to have that stuff dealing with secular issues, and we do. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem. And so I don't know how to separate that. How do you make that okay? How do you say, okay, if you want to go with the story that the world is 6,000 years old and that there's the guy with the beard and that whole thing, if that's working for you, that's great.
Yeah.
But you cannot get involved in a government position and making decisions
right.
for people who don't have that worldview. We can't do that. Mm. It's a problem.
How is that representative government then? If 70% of the country holds those beliefs, but you won't let any of those people into representative government?
Well, I think this is a discussion worth having.
Yeah.
Because that religion, the separation of church and state was a real thing. It was supposed to be a real thing. And we at least kept up the premise of it and the facade of it for a long time.
The facade of what?
That we have a secular government. Even though we have In God We Trust on our money. We kept up the facade for a while.
In God We Trust was only added like 60 years ago.
In the 50s, yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's how does a culture allow a spiritual space and keep it from like a partisan spiritual space from dominating a secular government, and how do you keep a secular government from dominating a spiritual space, a private spiritual practice? I mean, that's the idea, and I guess the pendulum swings back and forth a little
Well,
bit.
because I mean, this is what we're getting into is and Evno brings this up, like who gets to determine which views one needs to hold to be in public office? Because I was thinking about this slippery
It's a
slope
problem.
If we say no religious people are allowed to be in office, then we're basically saying only the religion of non-religion is allowed to be in office. Like it's a big problem. And so if we're saying you can't, like, here's the reason why you might not want conservative Christians in office, because conservative Christians have particular views about when Jesus is coming back to earth.
Yeah.
And those views of when Jesus is coming back to earth influence how they think tax dollars should be spent to benefit the planet.
Right.
So there are citizens who want their tax dollars to go towards minimizing fossil fuel infrastructure for the betterment of the long-term life of the planet.
Right.
And there are other citizens who think that that's a waste of tax dollars because Jesus is coming back soon.
And the world's going to end.
How are we going to represent both of those sets of citizens?
It's a problem.
Yeah.
So at one point, if you have, as you say, if you have this this magic internet thing where you can access, like if I was a kid, if there was internet when I was a kid and I could go Google all the business, I probably would have been killed by my parents for rebelling, because I tend to be a fairly logical person, and when I find evidence to show that the story that I've been told is wrong,
you would have stood up to
I
your
get
dad
pretty
more than you did.
vengeful.
Yeah.
So like when
Somebody
I found
lied
out
to you.
that the drug policy of this country was complete propaganda and hypocrisy, and actually opened up the slippery slope of us losing our ability to govern ourselves because
they criminalized what
crime.
you do to your own body.
Right. Once that happened, it opened up all this crap. So like when I found that out, I was mad. I was angry. And so I'm like, what else did they lie to me about?
Right. Which is usually how people leave religion.
But I had to go to the library and research that stuff. I couldn't just Google it. And now the problem is you can't just Google it, because, I mean, that's one of the posts that I made today is where do you get your information? What news source, what information source do you get your stuff from? Like, Wikipedia is interesting, but it challenges bubbles. Like, so I have a friend of mine who's a conservative politician now. He's a conservative politician. We'll call him that. And when I was talking to him about U.S. foreign policy and us getting involved in overthrowing regimes or democratic governments and putting in fake governments, even though I showed him the CIA website that told the history of how they did it.
How the U.S. went into other countries and took over their governments for the sake of their resources.
So he saw it.
Like it's documented.
He read it. And so I said, so what you're telling me is that you are reading the history of what happened and you're choosing to believe that it's not true.
I don't like that.
And he said, yes.
In writing.
I am choosing to disagree with facts.
Yes. Because I don't like that story.
That person should be
disqualified. That story would conflict with his entire identity.
That guy should not be allowed to be in politics.
If you're going to deny, like, that's the stuff the government's admitting that they did.
Right. You should not be allowed to be in politics if you say, I don't agree with verifiable facts. You should not be in a position where you're making law. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's not a religious. You don't have to have a religious. There are religious people that can do the thing. Mm-hmm. They can represent themselves. They can represent us. They can separate the secular world from their personal beliefs. People can do that. People have been doing that for a long period of time. But when somebody uses those beliefs to justify saying, I don't agree with your verifiable facts, yeah, you're disqualified. That should be the flag. It used to be the flag. You used to be able to call somebody out and say, ha, got you. You're out of the game, buddy. There's no getting anybody out of the game.
Better not vote for that person because they don't like facts.
They don't use their brain right.
Right.
That's a problem.
Astrid says, that's the problem I have with Christianity. Taking the right to take responsibility even for people that are not Christian believers. I know it's not all Christians, but the ones that are prone to condemn. It's a colonial behavior, which should be a bit out of fashion.
It should be a bit out of fashion.
Only. Oh my God. No. So, my parents basically never want to speak to me again because I had a girlfriend for 4 months. Like.
Sinner.
Like, they say it's because she was younger than me.
Wrong.
But, like, half the girls in my church got married in their teens.
Yeah.
It's because it's gay.
Gay.
And
Wrong.
in
Harm.
their world, they have the right to determine that I am not only harmful to myself, harmful to my former girlfriend, but I am also highly potentially harmful to my own sisters because of their belief system that gay is not a real relationship and is in fact harmful.
I think this might be a good segue to another part in the article that I was hyper focused on,
Okay.
which is about how. So if you think gay people are somehow afflicted with demonic actions or possession or something, and that they're harming themselves, and that's why you need to oppose it.
It's a
Should
sin.
you be
it's a
in
sin like being a chronic liar.
Now that the Supreme Court has said, yeah, maybe not so much, if you hold that view, should you be elected to public office? Where the secular view holds, if you have a religious view, should you be able to be in a position to influence, or should you recuse yourself, or should you not be allowed in at all? What do you think?
We have to go back to premises. If the U.S. is supposed to be representative government,
mm-hmm.
and 70% of the U.S. or more still has, in general, Christian beliefs by their own admission, that's not even the people that don't know they still have Christian beliefs.
Right.
Then should there not be people with Christian beliefs in our representative government?
Well, and that's at a point, there's a lot of different kinds of Christian beliefs. There's some gay-loving Christians.
Yeah.
There's some gay Christians. There's trans Christians. There's like all that's out there. So we're doing broad swath stuff. But where do you draw a line? If it's not that, okay, you don't use facts right, you can't represent me. And I guess that's up to the populace to say, like, well, we don't care if he likes facts or not. We still want him to represent us because we don't like facts. So should we just have that as a thing? I mean, that's what we got with Trump, right? People know that he's not grounded in fact. People know that he will lie. People know you can't not know that he lies. You can't not know that he's demonstrably racist. But if people don't mind, then I guess we can elect him. That's the system.
So the March for Life is a yearly event that happens in the National Mall in D.C.,
mm-hmm.
but also happens all over the country.
People who can't travel do it on their corner.
Yeah. So I participated in the March for Life every year growing up.
Sure.
Which is an event where people go out and protest abortions to try to save babies' lives.
Yes.
And we would hold up signs with Bible verses on it, and also acknowledging that not everybody holds the Bible to be authority over their life. We would hold up signs with facts about how many weeks old a baby is when its heart starts beating.
Sure.
How many weeks old a baby is when it can suck its thumb, in the hopes of appealing to the empathy of the people who might see those signs and be like, I thought it was just a bunch of cells. And it's like, well, actually, it looks like a baby from like this many weeks forward. Like, it's not a lump of cells for sure. And then a lot of March for Lifers would hold up signs of with pictures of aborted babies.
Yeah, I've seen
Just
that.
so you could be like, you're not pulling a lump of cells out of a woman's uterus. It's a human.
Okay.
So the March for Life in 2013 had almost 700,000 people in Washington, D.C. And these are people who believe that it is the government's job to stop women from killing babies in their uteruses.
Okay.
So how many representatives should represent those people? Because that 700,000 people is only a small percentage of the millions of people across the country who believe that the government should stop women from killing babies in their stomach.
Avno said, "Who gets to decide what is verifiable?" And Astrid said, "Science gets to decide." So, if we're supposed to be a secular society where religion and the state should be separate entities, the reason I wanted to go back is to continue this point is that is folded into like the religious views.
The March for Life?
The March for Life. That's a very there's not a lot of like Taoists in that group, I would imagine. There might be. There's probably
What's
maybe
a Taoist?
somebody who is a Chinese philosophy. I'm just saying it's probably mostly fundamentalist Christians of that much. So that's a religious perspective, and they're lobbying their government, and they have their right to do that. Sure. At what point do we the point that I wanted to go to in this article, to draw a parallel to that, is when they talk about the inherent racism in the conservative movements of the last 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
The demonstrable racism, the racism that when they realized they can't use certain terms, they had to create new terms,
Mm-hmm.
which get used by the conservative movement. The root of those terms is veiled racism, laid out by, he gives the name of the guy in there, laid out by somebody in Reagan's, I think it was Reagan's administration, where you just start using different euphemisms to push your racist agenda,
so you can
using secular terms.
Right, non-racist terms.
It's politically correct
Right.
to say this term, but what are you actually saying? You're saying the thing you were saying before, you're just doing it in a veiled way.
Right.
So that's what's going on. Like, they're not veiling the stuff anymore. It used to be a little more, the right to life used to be a little more veiled. Now it's overtly Christian and it's political front. And the inherent racism of the conservative movement used to be more veiled, and now it's not. It's like these people who are storming the Capitol to get the government to open up again are bringing Confederate flags and Nazi flags. It's not an isolated incident. So there's racism built in. So how, this is what he was addressing in this article, how do you, what conservatives don't understand, right? How do you get conservatives to understand that what they're doing is rooted in racism, and that they have to face that? They have to face that they're actually in a racist movement. And there's no arguing that you're not in a racist movement if you're using racist terms.
You're aligned with a racist group, right. A group that is historically racist. You don't have to continue to align yourself with that group in order to hold the beliefs that you have, but you cannot much longer just say you didn't know.
You didn't know, right.
I didn't know conservatism was racist. We have the internet now.
Do you have parts of that in the article that you want to read, or should I read out a thing on that?
Oh, let's see. Evno and Astrid are having a side conversation about how do we know which science is safe if, as a citizen, all you have access to is like, you might be like, okay, I'm only going to read peer-reviewed journals forever. And it's like, okay, but...
The peer review process is a problem.
The peer review process is a problem. And also, how do you know that that data being put out wasn't, that set of experiments or that evaluation of existing data wasn't funded by someone who wanted you to prove that sunscreen doesn't cause cancer?
There's also, Robert Anton Wilson wrote a book called The New Inquisition, which talks about the new priesthood, and it's the people in the white lab coats instead of the black or red robes in church. They just wear the white lab coats, and there is this cult of science that is, like other positions of power, tend to make a problem for anybody that challenges the orthodoxy. Even if it's science, which should be ironic, right? Even if you have a science that sort of bucks the system of your science, you should be open to that. That's the point of science, is to revise yourself when new information comes in. But when you have money and power around scientific institutions that are based on a premise, then you have heretics that come up and get squashed. And that's the problem with the peer review process, is that what if your peers, there's a great side conversation, the peer review process is basically, you don't get something into the public view if it challenges the citadel, if it challenges the priesthood.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever the priesthood is. And I think it's very interesting because Astrid has been this wonderful, objective voice of life outside the U.S., because we're not the only country on the planet.
What?
And in general, life beyond fundamentalist religion. And she often brings up these wonderful perspectives of like, Well, but you can see how that thinking is very black and white and not very objective.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to watch this side conversation with Shayna and Astrid and Evno talking about science, and I'm beginning to wonder if science is Astrid's priesthood. It's hard for us to not want somebody to be in charge.
Right. Well,
we want somebody to have the answers.
Some framework for how we do things is useful.
You have to be able to go somewhere for information outside of yourself if you're going to keep evolving.
Well, this is the challenge that I found during this whole virus is like I feel a little dubious about everything the CDC says. I feel a little dubious about everything the WHO says. Because again, these are entities that are financed. And that financing comes from agendas. There's agendas that are financing that thing, which makes it not always, even though it's science, it's not objective. I don't think it's fully objective. I think it's, you do what the people with the money tell you to do. You don't do things with the people with the money tell you not to do.
Yeah, because you need to keep getting the money. Evno says, I got in trouble at my university for hosting a Musicians Against GMOs on my radio show, since Monsanto is funding the Department of Agriculture for millions of dollars a year. Astrid says, it's a huge problem to say that science is free game just because science is always developing, pushing knowledge, etc. Shayna says, there's plenty of methodologically sound research that won't get funded and published because it doesn't fit academia's agenda. If you go on Google and try to find information for the health benefits of cannabis, you'll have to go through 2 or 3 pages talking about how cannabis is bad for you and causes schizophrenia before you find that one blogger that's put his information out there. And you might say, well, then if I'm not finding information for for health benefits of cannabis, then there must not be any. Right. It must not be beneficial. If I can't find it in the broad, fair ocean of the internet, sorry, the internet is also regulated. It's a crafted fairy tale. We live in a crafted fairy tale. The more aware we are of the fairy tale, like if Jack and Jill had heard their own fairy tale before the fairy tale happened, they might have not had such a horrible end, Like, the more aware we can be that we are in a crafted fairy tale, the more sovereignty we can take over our role in the fairy tale. Google is not going to just show you. You can take efforts to try to find objective search results on Google. You can use a VPN to scramble your IP's location, so it won't give you results based on your location on the planet. You can use an incognito browser on Chrome, so it won't give you results based on other things that you've searched for or the demographic that it perceives that you're in. You can do various things. You can use browsers besides Google and look for things. Like you can do the exact same search in Google, in Yelp, in Bing, in several other search engines and see how many different results that you get. But just because you're not finding information for the health benefits of cannabis doesn't mean that there isn't any health benefit to cannabis.
If you Google how much is Dark Sevier worth, one of the first things that comes up says that I'm worth $8 million.
Because he was on an episode of Saved by the Bell.
Yeah.
And Saved by the Bell has made a lot of money.
Yeah, so it makes sense. It's a famous show. He was on it. He must be worth $8 million.
Yeah. Shayna says, silence is really great, but it should still be heavily questioned. You can manipulate the same set of data to say whatever you'd like it to, and most people either don't care to read into the study or don't know what they're looking at. I would say, at least as far as people that I've met in the US, most people don't know that just because it's a scientific paper doesn't mean the data isn't manipulated. I know that's a lot of double negatives. Most people don't know that data in scientific journals has been manipulated to fit a hypothesis. That's what you do. You say, I wonder if such and such is true, and then you go out and see if you can find data to prove it. And hopefully, if you find data that disproves your wondering, you will go with the flow of the data. But if there's money backing you finding that particular result, you probably won't go with the flow of the data. It's like that study we got really angry at earlier this year that said that that guy used to prove that people who have Christianity in their life kill themselves less. But it ended up being a study in the 90s of middle-aged white women who don't kill themselves very much and go to church. And that's the information that he used.
If you go to church, you won't kill yourself.
It was a Journal of American Medical Association's scholarly article about middle-aged white women in the 90s who also went to church and had a low suicide rate, and he put that bar graph up on the wall and
Without
said,
qualification.
without any qualifications or background information or information about the members of the study or the data that was studied, and he said, see, people who go to church kill themselves less.
Those people, that small group of people, do.
Flip myself.
But he
Flip
didn't
the
say
table.
that small
Nope.
particular group of people. So that gets used all the time, and that's part of the problem with, like, so my politician friend, my conservative politician friend, who I said, yeah, you might want to find out about what happened in South America, why we have people fleeing to the border, the southern border, is because of stuff we've been doing for decades. Doesn't believe it. The same thing in Iran, doesn't believe it. So I'm like, well, here's the information. He's like, Wikipedia can be manipulated. I'm like, yeah, like science can be manipulated,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's a group of people who are constantly refining. Wikipedia, an entry may be wrong one day, but if you question that wrongness, people will come in and say, that is correct and your old information is wrong. Or they might say, yes, somebody gave the wrong information and it can be refined. Why can't we have this? Why can't this be a tool that both find a tool that the left and the right, the progressives and the conservatives can look at and say, okay, this is a crowdsourced information source. We can agree that the history of us overthrowing the democratic government of Iran is a real thing. And we can talk about that as a premise.
Yeah.
It's no longer a fact I disagree with. Like, why? So the idea of getting, yes, you can be a Christian and you can be a politician and you can represent your Christian. We still need to have a place that says, yeah, well, we don't have enough evidence that the world is 6,000 years old. We have other evidence that it's larger. We're going to go with this premise, okay? Mm-hmm. So that has to be the premise of your decision making. Even though at home you think it's 6,000 years old. Mm. We have to have some objective, objective verifiable
if
source.
This representative is representing several million Americans who think that Jesus is coming back soon, and they don't want their tax dollars used for infrastructure that won't matter in 50 or 60 years because Jesus is coming back, how do you argue that? He's representing millions of citizens.
I guess you just hope that nature comes up with some kind of answer to that.
Shall we read about racism?
Yes.
The very framers of the Constitution, this is from Peter Kruger's article, What Don't Most Conservatives Realize? The very framers of the Constitution that conservatives so often revere to me believed in ordered liberty. Not just the famous quote about your right to swing your fist ends at my face. They generally agree that all liberty came with responsibility, and I'll happily point you towards the writings of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau that they were directly influenced by regarding that. It was never the idyllic world of Leave It to Beaver and the Andy Griffith Show. The U.S. had a period of history with unregulated free markets and laissez-faire government attitudes towards business. We had a world without environmental restrictions and pollution controls and everything else. And you know what? It sucked. It sucked enough that a lot of people stood up and said, we are tired of this bullcrap. There was enough nationwide consensus to pass multiple amendments to the Constitution and create these laws over the last 150 years because conditions sucked. It wasn't idyllic unless you happened to be of a certain demographic. Sure, you want everyone to have that now. You want to have the good bits without the bad ones. You weren't there causing those problems. You aren't to blame, for instance, for women not being able to vote or black people being slaves or Native Americans getting murdered.
Yeah.
I get it. But when you keep repeating phrases like make America great again, what you think you're saying and what it actually means to a lot of other citizens is not the same thing. When you use phrases like America first because you think it will restore some halcyon glory days, you are directly calling back to a history that was horrifically traumatic for a lot of people. And you are directly ignoring the fact that those prosperous moments in history you are thinking about were built on the sufferings of those people. You are a lot more racist than you really understand, and your tolerance of open racism in your coalition makes you complicit. Now, this, to take a break from what Peter is saying here for a second, we talked about this last week. That was kind of our chosen example. Like, what don't most liberals realize? Because liberals love to spank conservatives for being racist or homophobic or misogynistic. It's so delicious to be able to spank somebody for doing something that you know is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a lot about the responsibility of having psycho-emotional evolution. If you have the privilege of knowing something is unhealthy or harmful, don't multiply the harm by spanking the person who's making that mistake. Spread education, spread enlightenment.
Well, you have to be more enlightened. You have to take the position of saying, if they knew how harmful it was, they probably wouldn't do it.
Right.
So let's go with that premise. A lot of people think, oh, they're just being mean. They're not just being mean. They don't have a living experience that allows them the understanding of the meanness, the cruelty, and the incorrectness of what they're doing. So your job is not to spank them for not having an education. Your job is to educate them, and that means meeting them where they are, and not coming up from the elite position
high
of
horse.
spanking.
Jeez, yeah. How can you be standing on a high horse and also think of yourself as better than somebody? If you have the privilege of knowing, of feeling like you know right and wrong more than somebody else, you sure as heck shouldn't get up on a pedestal and spank them for not knowing.
So that was last week's version.
Yeah.
This week he's saying, but you should really know.
Yeah.
If you're a conscious conservative person, you need to understand where your philosophy and your platform came from, and you need to know it's racist, even though you don't think you are.
There's been some kind of rebellion in conservative circles against change, and against adding new awarenesses, and I think a lot of that probably comes from the Judeo-Christian mindset, because the Word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, and neither a jot nor tittle of it will fall away. Like the Bible is perfect and was perfect when it was written, and it's perfect for today, and we don't need to change anything. So gay is still wrong, even though the Bible said it 3,000 years ago. Like blah blah blah. Like the Bible doesn't need to change, therefore nothing else needs to change. Therefore, I don't need to add new awarenesses into my environment that maybe I should be sensitive about Native American history and minorities in the U.S. and rampant misogyny towards women. Maybe I should be sensitive about it. Get him, Billy. Get him. Oh, did you smack your ankle, little lady? So there's... I've seen lots and lots of conservative people just be like, oh, I don't have time for that, or that's exhausting, or that's just so extra. When you try to be like, hey, you really shouldn't say stuff like that, and like, oh, you're just a social justice warrior, or a precious snowflake, or you and your identity politics, or you and your virtual signaling.
Right, so he basically says, when you start making everything racist, when real racism comes, people are worn out.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that happened with...
I feel like the people
who were real big, like the ardent fans of Hillary Clinton, started calling everybody sexist just because they disagreed with her policy, or they disagreed with everything with sexism if you didn't want her as president. And that lays the ground for somebody like Joe Biden to come in and people say, I guess, They ruined it in the last cycle.
We can't talk about sexism anymore.
They destroyed, they put a big hole in the side of feminism by overusing it in a way where nobody, they use it for what is not. And now when something really happens, it's like crying wolf. You've already heard it so many times. Right. Everything's racist, everything's sexist, so I don't care anymore. And that's what happens when liberals overuse this thing and use it as a spanking mechanism on people who just haven't been to this party yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Peter goes on to say, Shayna says, I love it when the left eats itself.
It's what happens.
I don't know if she's talking about us or about the left making their own job harder by being horrible to the people they're trying to help.
Yes, I'll go with that one.
Yeah. Astrid says, so what's the alternative? Ask a priest? Look on the internet until you find something that satisfies your predispositioned ideas? I can promise you can find anything that you want.
Yes.
Yes. This is something that we're having to realize in the scope of the Post-Orthodoxy show. Who are we talking to? People have to want to live in a bigger universe than the one that they started in order to care about the stuff we're talking about on this show.
An outpost in the borderlands is the tagline.
Yeah.
Um,
This show is going to be
we're
no
not
good
converting folks.
No, you have to do that yourself. If you have a desire to expand or a desire to convert or a desire to break out or whatever sort of words you want to use, then I'm your guy. Like, I will talk you over that bridge all day. But until that moment, our conversations are basically useless. Because I have no desire to use my mental sledgehammer to break into somebody's brain and force them to change their beliefs.
It doesn't work that way.
That's not evolution.
It doesn't work that way.
It's not healthy. Okay, Peter goes on to say, conservatives don't want to be called racists. I get it. Racism is bad. They understand that. You realize you shouldn't say racial slurs and you shouldn't make black jokes and Jew jokes anymore. You don't harbor any animosity towards people from other ethnicities, so you totally aren't a racist, right? You're not intentionally racist, so you aren't a racist, right? And so when you and I were doing the copacetic conversations with Mokai, we talked a lot about malignant racism versus benign racism for the benefit of progressives who just want to spank anybody that does anything racist, whether that's productive or not. It's like, look, sometimes people are actually being dicks. Sometimes they just don't know, and you spanking them is going to make them feel like they need to defend themselves from you.
Yeah, you're not winning them over the bridge that way.
No. Peter goes on to say, it's a lot more complicated than that. Conservative history has a long trail of racism behind it, and you need to understand how even if you aren't openly racist, much of the language you still use is coded racism. You may very well believe in the ideology you espouse without a shred of racist intent. You may very well believe in states' rights and reforming the social safety net and limited government and everything else. But time and time again, these concepts have been coded ways to justify disparate and discriminatory treatment of racial minorities in the U.S. Advancing policies without regard for the history and their original intent furthers that racism, even if you don't have a racist intent yourself.
The drug war under Nixon, where they criminalized marijuana, that's an example we used earlier. That to me, that is designed, coded classism and racism. They made it illegal because the folks that used marijuana at the time, when they made it illegal, were hippies, Mexicans, black people, artists, all the people who weren't up on the straight and narrow.
Anti-war protesters.
Anti-war protesters. So if you criminalize the common usage of this thing, you criminalize the people who use it. And so people who didn't use it, they're like, well, I guess the government's making it illegal because it's bad. And now all these people begin to behave as criminals. So when you have somebody like Joe Biden, who's running for president, and he says, I will not legalize marijuana because I believe it's a gateway drug. That is something that has been disproven for decades.
Over and over and over again.
That is a line from the Reagan era, and it's a policy from the Nixon era.
How long ago was Reagan president?
80.
So 40 years
40
ago.
years ago. And before that, it was Nixon. It was Nixon who initiated it. So when you say, I do not want to legalize marijuana, people are like, who cares if he wants to legalize? We got bigger things right now. We have to deal with Trump. I'm like, well, what he's saying is I'm okay with classism and racism.
Yeah.
That's what I'm okay with. He can't be ignorant to that. That's a virtue signal to your Southern racist voters. That's a virtue signal to the pharmaceutical industry. That's a virtue signal to the donors that are propping him up as a candidate. So when you're voting for Biden, you are voting for somebody who is promoting a racist agenda by keeping marijuana illegal. It's not about whether you want to get high or not. It's about whether you want to have a class war continue in this country.
Anti-war protesters, artists, minorities, musicians. Anti-war protesters, artists, minorities, musicians.
Yeah.
So basically the government got people who still trusted the government had their best interests at heart to criminalize people who knew the government did not have their best interests at heart.
Yes. Which then...
The artists, the anti-war protesters.
The minorities.
And the minorities.
They were very aware.
Who knew that our male-centric, white-centric government does not have the entire citizen's best interests at heart.
Right. So we criminalize them.
All the people that did still trust in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that the government is out to take care of us, got their brains blended. I think it's just so ironic that the campaign was like, this is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs, and they blend your brain in a blender.
No, it was eggs on a frying pan.
Oh, really?
Fries your brain.
Oh, no, I saw the one that was like, this is your brain on drugs, and they would like blend your brain in a, maybe that was an ad for Hulu a long time, I don't know, but they were mocking, they were using the war
the original egg one, yeah.
Whatever it is, it's like, no, that's what was done to the good citizens who didn't care who smoked marijuana were brainwashed to think that people who smoke marijuana are criminals.
Well, they made them criminals by endorsing that policy.
Right.
They criminalized a section of the country that was not committing a crime.
Right.
And they are still criminalized to this day.
Yeah.
There are people in jail in states where big corporations are making money on marijuana. There are a lot of minorities rotting in cells
for marijuana crimes.
For having a pot plant in their backyard,
Yeah.
or growing something, or taking something for the cancer.
That should have never happened. No, people should, like, it should have been like, no one is allowed to make money off of marijuana until everyone is freed from jail who went to jail for marijuana. That is ridiculous. That is a crime. That's a crime.
So when people say, well, we got to vote for Biden because Trump, I'm like, Biden is a racist.
Yeah. Like, historically, you can look at his policies.
He's a racist. So you're voting for, well, he's not as bad a racist. When did you ever think that you would say that? He's not as bad a sexual harassment person. He's not as bad of a misogynist. He's not as bad
of a racist.
And I'm going to endorse somebody who's not as bad as a racist. This is where you do want to flip the table and say, what are you talking about?
Oy, oy, oy. Astrid, Shayna, let's see, Evno. Gosh, so many good comments. They're kind of going off on each other about that scientific inquiry thing, which is great.
I like the Star Trek idea. I like the idea that there's a council and there's a bunch of people on Earth that are like, can we take a moment and get the kids quiet? The billionaire feedback loop screaming children, can we just set them aside for a second and say, we all inherited this planet by being born here. Can we put these guys in a room?
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. And that means getting over, that's not going to be a religious movement.
How do the civilians put BlackRock in a room in the corner? How do we put BlackRock in timeout?
BlackRock?
How do we put Johnson & Johnson in timeout? How do we put Pepsi in timeout?
Well, we have to have a conversation about it. We have to figure out who is, if you're talking about harm, we have to have a new agreement on what harm is. Right now we've let religious entities have their version of harm.
Right.
We let political forces and market forces have their idea of harm, which is criminalizing people who were not.
They skewed the idea of benefit.
So we have to have new agreements on what harm is, and what governance is, and what representation is. And there are countries now that are recognizing the environment as having rights. The environment has rights. Montana at least gave rights to the human parts to have a healthy environment, which is close. We did that in the 70s. We rewrote our Constitution to make sure that we have rights to a healthy environment because of all the mining. That's why that got changed. We have to, as states, towns, countries, start restoring rights to the environment, because that's where you start changing the game. And we can do that. I mean, Montana, a red state in the 70s, made sure that we gave ourselves rights to a healthy environment, if not the environment having rights itself. Giving rights to a river to not be poisoned.
Humans have the right. Yeah, I think it's going to take a long time to get Westerners out of the Christian idea of original sin and the superiority of humanity. That without religion, humans are broken and selfish and will always choose rape unless God tells them not to rape.
Right.
And that humans, God made the earth and then he made humans to enjoy the earth, and that we're special and the animals are on a level below us. Like if you're going to talk about environmental rights, then you're basically challenging the idea that humans are in a special class outside of the rest of the planet.
Yeah, we're halfway with Montana's constitution. That's at least some middle ground.
Yeah.
You can still be a Christian and say, I'd like to have a healthy environment.
Yeah.
Without like getting all into Gaian philosophy.
I'd like my children to be able to plant a little garden in the backyard without the tomatoes pulling
Poisoning
all of the
them?
poison out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Nate Martin says, truth, our wars remind me of the tire fire in The Simpsons. It's just always burning, and we are used to it. I guess we haven't seen an episode. I just started watching The Simpsons for the first time recently.
I think it's in the opening credits. It's when they pan across the city, there's always a
tire fire?
in the junkyard,
That's
yeah.
funny. Yeah. Yeah, we're just used to it. We're just used to being at war. Evno said he wishes we still had anti-war protesters like the good old days.
We've hyper-normalized.
I was like, it's so normal for us to be at war. We don't even think of it as being at war. We've been trained to talk about us being at war as us out there spreading democracy to other countries. We're helping other countries have freedom, but only the freedoms that benefit certain members of our country.
This comment, we have another comment from Shayna Ray, and getting people on board with the concept of sacrificing their convenience and comfort for the sake of greater accountability and sustainability, which seems like a huge barrier. Well,
right, my
that's why
personal wishes or the betterment of everyone.
We already have classism.
Right.
It's a economic class system. It's racial class, but also economic class system. Since we like that, since we keep doing classist behavior, can't we just have a better classism? Can't we just say people who think the world is 6,000 years old get to have a good time over here, but we need to let the adults run the show? Can't we have a different kind of, this is what the Republicans have been bagging on. This is what that Isaac Asimov post was about, is you cannot allow a comparison between my opinion and established factual reality. They don't both get to weigh in the scale the same way. Where can we get that scale?
Well, this kind of goes back to what Astrid and Evno were arguing about, how do we know what is fact?
We're doomed.
Yeah. This is why
doomed.
large portions of the citizens of the U.S. don't want to have these sorts of conversations, because it goes to some kind of exhausting random endpoints.
When I was doing stand-up,
I didn't mean to be racist. We don't need to talk about it. Let's just go have dinner.
When I was in Los Angeles and doing stand-up comedy, I wrote a letter that a friend of mine said, you should send that to George Carlin. I sent it was about me ripping on the state of comedy. So I sent it to George Carlin. He called me and said it was a wonderful assessment of the state of comedy. And I was like, I just talked to a deity.
I won!
Right. And then a couple of years later, I had gotten out of comedy. I was burnt out. I had gone through this whole, I don't know what I would call it. I'd gone through
psychic modulation.
I'd gone through some adjustments, self-induced adjustments, and was feeling like maybe we could be having a better time with each other. Maybe it doesn't have to be doom and destruction. Maybe we don't have to wipe everything out with an ecological apocalypse. Maybe we could make better choices for each other, which would be good for us individually. Yeah. Maybe we could do that. And I was really optimistic. And then Carlin came out with another one-man show in it where he basically says we're a virus and we need to wipe ourselves out and we're doomed. And that
was your hero.
And it was my hero, and I was like, no. I wrote him a really nasty letter. I went to go to the guy who knows what he's doing. He's got a perspective. He's an elder, and I went and told him how wrong he was.
Oh my gosh.
He didn't call me back on that one. And
I thought he did call you back, but then he died, and so you never got to
No. That was another thing.
Oh.
He didn't call me back on that one, and I felt betrayed that somebody who I looked up to had given up.
Mm.
Later on, I realized him saying we're idiots and we should quit was a part of a boost to me to say, no, we should do something. And I realized he was pulling my chain, and like, there was wisdom in what he was doing,
He was
right?
passing the torch, because if he told you, okay, it's time for you to rise up and take the mantle, you'd be like, heck you, old man, don't tell me what to do, I'm youth.
Right.
But he was basically like, you can't save anyone. You were like, heck you, old man,
Right.
just watch me.
But now I'm feeling it. I'm totally feeling that George Carlin special.
Yeah.
I am feel like we could be doing something else, but we're not.
Yeah.
We know we could be doing something else.
How do we...
And we're not.
How do we spread the knowledge to all the people without being the overlords that take over everyone's TVs to spread the knowledge to all the people?
Well, I guess at one point it gets too uncomfortable. I mean, this is what always happens. It gets too uncomfortable. The proletariat rise up because it's too painful.
Right, like when the women's rights movement started 100 years ago, and the civil rights movement started 70, 80 years ago, and
so I made a prediction after
Martin Luther King was trying to do the poor people's movement when he got killed.
I made a prediction after September 11th. So like the war on drugs, well, it was communist. Oh, the communists are the bad guys. And then as a stopgap, we had the war on drugs. So now the war is on drugs. And then that went for a while. And then terrorism came along, which was great because it wasn't an actual thing.
It was just an
It's
idea.
a concept. It's an idea. So now we have a war on an idea.
We can hate on the idea of that thing.
Anything that uses that tries to achieve a political gain through using some sort of harmful tactic is terrorism. So I'm like, well, that's the war on terror is actual terrorism. We're actually terrorizing people with the war on terror. So I thought, well, okay, what happens when we wear out the war on terror? Like, what's the next war going to be? And I thought, it's going to be interdimensional beings.
Because after a while, the war on terror will be a norm. Just
It'll
like
be
the
a
war,
norm.
just like the war on drugs is a norm.
So in like 2011, I'm like, the next war is going to be on interdimensional beings, and it's either going to be like aliens or demons again. We'll go back to demons or something, but or aliens, a threat from the outside that we also can't see. But the virus is pretty good. It's a no-see-em.
Oh yeah.
It's like germs, which used to be considered demons.
The
so
war on
I
germs.
might have been close.
We're like going all the way back to the war on germs all over again.
We're going back to germs are demons.
You
and
can't
they're
see 'em.
everywhere, and you can't see them.
And you don't know if you have them. That's
You
why
might have
you need
'em.
Jesus to tell you if you have them or not.
So I think I was pretty close.
Yeah.
We're in the new
I
war.
mean, I wouldn't. You're young yet. Don't give out on
Interdimensional beings.
on war on aliens.
So,
Everybody's thinking about the sky a lot more these days with Elon Musk's SpaceX satellites booping along every night. There's like 30, 40 satellites that go by, around 8 or 9 here in Montana.
So I want to have another war. Let's have another war.
What?
No, wait. They're doing the war on interdimensional beings. So we've had civil rights, women's rights, indigenous rights. Still got a lot of work to do there. We have. What about cognitive rights?
What does that mean to you?
There's an organization called Cognitive Liberty that says that should be a civil rights movement. Is you should have the right to toy with your brain chemistry. Cognitive liberty means that if I want to use marijuana to augment my neurochemistry to get a different perspective, because that's what works for me. If I want to use ecstasy or ketamine or LSD or cocaine, if I want to use any of those drugs, and I'm not harming myself and I'm using them responsibly to augment my cognition, we should have the right to do that. Right now, we don't have the right to cognitive liberty.
Right.
So.
Well, I mean.
That's where I feel back in the 90s. I'm like, that's the rights movement that we need to have.
People just don't have any sovereignty. Forget cognitive sovereignty. Like, they don't have hardly any sovereignty. Like you.
Well, doesn't it come with cognitive sovereignty
There's
first?
all these social things, like you can't get certain jobs unless you wear certain clothes or don't have tattoos. That needs to be gone.
It's kind of going.
That needs to be over with.
Right.
A nurse that has tattoos can be just as good or better a phlebotomist than a nurse that does not have tattoos, and you need to get over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to go. This like social non-sovereignty that you don't get to be yourself and also have a good life.
So I would like to say that we should have a movement to recognize our right to cognitive liberty and neurochemical augmentation. That should be a thing. But when you have the progressive left endorsing a lighter shade of racist, who is endorsing a racist drug policy, I don't know how close we're going to get.
Kevin Noel Olson joined us for the last 10 minutes of our show this afternoon.
Yeah. Hi,
Nick,
Kevin.
He says, drug war is pork barrel spending. What does that mean to you? I've never heard
Pork barrel?
Pork barrel spending.
Oh, that money goes to police departments. It funds police departments.
What does pork barrel mean?
Pork barrel is a term, you can look it up, but pork barrel basically means it's non-essential. And so like a pork barrel project is like, a famous pork barrel project was, there was a bill that needed to go on immigration, and in that bill was ensuring that there was a bridge for some island in Alaska that actually went to nowhere.
Okay.
Because it was for the contractor. The contractor donated to the politician, so the politician needed to do a quid pro quo, so he put something in the bill that got this contractor a gig, so he invests $20,000. This is what's going on. This is what this guy articulates in his article, is in Wisconsin, you have a guy who, like, spent $20,000 on Walker's campaign, and then he got a $500,000 contract to bulldoze the side of a hill and take the grass off and put new grass in. $500,000 or $250,000, something like that. That's pork barrel.
Pork barrel is a metaphor for the appropriation of government spending for localized projects secured primarily to bring money to a representative's district.
Yeah.
The usage originated in American English. Scholars use it as a technical term regarding legislative control of local appropriations. So in Kevin Noel Olson's case, the drug war is pork barrel spending. Putting people in prison for marijuana-related offenses makes a lot of money for private prisons and police departments.
First you criminalize a segment of non-criminals, and then you built a business around housing them.
Evno says, some see Gates as a savior and some see him as trying to euthanize half the planet. Choose which divisive content against conversation is being used. I don't quite understand, but
well, yeah, can we come to a consensus? Can we say Bill Gates is really awesome and terrible at the same time? I mean, like, maybe he's doing some great work, but he also has some weird things in his track record.
Since we have no idea of knowing what his intentions are, and we don't have any idea of what information he has become privy to. Right. Over his years of being involved with the very upper echelons of the planet, maybe he has become privy to stuff. Yeah. Which makes him feel like his actions right now are the best thing he can possibly do with the resources at his disposal to try to help the people.
And it could also be a disaster.
Or it could be that he's trying to make a lot of money, but we don't know.
Right. It could be all of those things.
Yeah. Shayna says the war on drugs is a brilliant way to fund the military, keep people poor, divide the people against each other, and make folks way easier to manipulate.
The war on drugs militarized all our police forces.
Nate Martin, actually I liked Reagan, but I think the drug war is one of the worst things to happen to our country.
Yes.
Reagan was also a very nice grandfatherly guy, like Biden.
He liked jelly beans, apparently.
That makes him relatable.
And didn't like broccoli. No, that was George Bush.
Kevin says the zombie war might be here before the war on space aliens. And that goes right along with Shayna's comment that we have wrapped our war on the virus in racism and xenophobia.
Oh, well, yeah.
You know?
Sure.
Like...
Well, it's classism as well. Who's getting tested and who's not getting tested.
And what are the lockdowns like? Some countries have done lockdowns in ways that have been beneficial and helpful to the civilians, and other countries have just forced people to stay home.
Well, since it might be good that prison is a private, for-profit industry, because if a bunch of people start dying off, that's going to be bad for business.
Astrid wants to know, do you see a difference in marijuana and other drugs? Using the term drug war seems very broad.
Well,
that's what we call it here. That's what they call it in the U.S., the war on drugs. That's like
they call it the war on drugs.
The war on drugs, because all drugs are bad. That was the story.
They classified marijuana with heroin.
Yeah.
They classified LSD with
I don't know if they
heroin.
Have drug scheduling in Europe, but in the U.S. we have a schedule, which means at the very top are the Schedule 1 drugs. No one can even use those drugs in a laboratory to do tests on them to figure out what they are made of or what they're good for. Not human tests. People can't even use Schedule 1 drugs in laboratories to test those chemicals. They're so bad, we just can't even do experiments with them.
Well, marijuana
is a Schedule 1 drug.
Marijuana wasn't illegal until we criminalized it. It might have been a misdemeanor or looked down upon, but when we criminalized it, we made sure that all our allies also followed suit.
Yeah, I wonder if there's drug scheduling. So like, do you see a difference between marijuana and other drugs?
Yes.
We personally
Very
do
much so.
see all the differences between all the different kinds of for neurological chemicals.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., largely, most citizens don't see a difference.
They don't know the difference between methamphetamine and marijuana and
Meth,
heroin
marijuana,
and ketamine.
heroin,
They don't know.
cocaine,
It's all drugs.
Adderall. It's just
Yeah.
bad. And people, so no.
It's 5:59.
Yeah.
We got to wrap it up.
Oh, Astrid wants to know if we support heroin.
I support the legalization of heroin.
My position morally is what you do with your body should have nothing to do with the government.
Heroin, cocaine, all that stuff should be made available in countries where they've legalized them across the board, stopped spending money on incarceration, started spending money on treatment.
And harm reduction.
Harm reduction, making sure people had good drugs. And not
as good as in clean.
You can have testing kits to make sure you're not killing yourself with a drug.
And you've been educated on how to don't drink alcohol and do this thing.
Drug abuse dropped precipitously.
Yes.
Once you legalize it, there's no longer a black market. That also keeps it, that money, those black markets, that's what we did. That's what the CIA did with the war in Afghanistan and the war in Vietnam, is we made black market drugs raised their prices so that they could fund their black operations in the CIA and overthrow governments all over the world. It was done on the back.
We have to do an episode about drugs.
Yeah, okay. It's a big story.
Because we've been putting off doing it because it's
601.
really touchy, and people have loved ones who have had horrible lives because of substance abuse.
Yeah. All drugs, in my opinion, should be made legal. I don't think criminalizing, if you have a drug addiction, that's a health problem. That's not a criminal problem.
And we are aware that alongside full-scale legalization, as in what you do with your body should not be a crime, there should also be widespread education towards harm reduction, widespread testing so that people can have access to clean. It's fine, we can talk.
We have somebody coming at 6.
What do you mean we have somebody coming at 6?
We have to be done at 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Kevin, we missed you. Children are hugely negatively impacted by alcohol. It's legal though. Shayna, very good point.
Yeah, we can go on all day.
Yeah, we need to do substances, chemicals, neurochemicals, psychedelics.
By the way, very quickly, we're not going to be doing the Thursday show anymore. We're killing ourselves trying to research, produce,
do two
edit
2-hour shows and then
podcast,
edit them, which takes like 4 hours.
We can't do it 2 weeks, so we're just going to be doing our Sunday show. We do it live on Facebook. It gets edited, shown played on KBMF in the same slot the next week. So you always have 2 options.
We need to do some catch up. We need to be producing a better quality show for you guys, which means I need to do some research into camera equipment and other software that I could be using. And we want to get our old podcasts online so that you guys can have access to the archive of shows that you've participated in.
Yes.
So at least for the foreseeable future, we're just going to be doing the 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday show.
Less is more.
Yeah, that's the hope. So soft pencil it in for next week. We'll talk about chemicals.
Yeah, we'll be back. Let's talk about drugs.
Yeah, and alcohol.
We've already done the politics and religion. We'll get to sex later.
Yeah, things you put into your body should not be illegal. What you do with your body should not be illegal.
Thanks for playing. We'll see you next week.
Gosh, guys, so many good comments. It's so hard to end. We love you.
Well, the comments can continue on. I would like to actually continue on in the comments after the show, but we have an appointment at 6 o'clock, so thanks for playing.
Very good. All right, see you guys.